Hey, welcome. Duvid back with Deshaun Marquel for our second installment. Last week went very well. I've been talking with Deshaun Marquel for years about doing this, and we finally got it done. And the first episode, very happy the way that went. They had a lot of feedback, reasonable reception, and we got a lot of different things we want to talk about. And I spoke to Deshaun about what we should talk about. He recommended HR 40 and try to keeping in tune with the current events in politics and local uh, Detroit settings, like we talked about the rise of Black conservatism last week. That we talk about HR 40 and reparations, and long term we'll probably be talking about more things that affect the Jewish community. So let me just quickly read what HR 40 is. People are probably familiar with it, and I'll hand it over to Deshaun to chime in. So HR 40, this is just the introduction. I'll even screen share this real quick so people could see this. HR 40 is House Resolution 40, largely about reparations. To address the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery in the United States and the 13 American colonies between 1619 and 1865, and to establish the commission to study and consider a national apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery, its subsequent de jure and de facto racial and economic discrimination against African Americans, and the impact of these forces on living African Americans, to make recommendations to the Congress of appropriate remedies and for other purposes. And as many sponsors, I encourage people to read through the bill. And so let me hand it over to Deshaun, and I'm glad you're back.
Yes, good evening to all the listeners. I'm very honored to be in your audience tonight. And I'm going to make an early disclaimer that I am not here to stipulate any agenda or any truth. My presence here tonight is only to raise awareness and to promote discourse through intelligent and civil conversations. So, I'm going to jump straight into it. My particular opinion about HR 40 is that it's very complex in nature. It's been an extreme gap in time, and the whole movement of reparations, for better words, is something that's been under the radar for the last 30 or 40 years through various political circles. But to bring everybody up to speed, I personally think that it's going to be very complicated to make an intelligent assessment because the damages are so vast and wide and multi-layered. One aspect I was discussing with Duvid is that people, when they think about the topic of slavery in the United States, chattel slavery, they really only look at the labor aspect. But what I'm here to share with you guys tonight is that people conveniently and constantly overlook the brain drain, the concept of intellectual property and, for better words, captive innovation, because, slavery was very much a labor-driven institution, but there were those who were captive Africans, what the majority of people call slaves, who came up with brilliant and innovative ways to minimize labor, and it was the predecessor to the Industrial Revolution. So, Duva, you can jump back in.
Yeah, we've been discussing this for a while. Just between ourselves, it's a very common topic. If you look on Wikipedia, you'll see we're from Metro Detroit. John Conyers, who was one of the longest serving congressmen, who passed away or retired recently, and his son actually lost in the to Rashida Tlaib. The seat that's now held by Rashida Tlaib was Conyers' seat, and he had he had tried to propose legislation for reparations for 30 some years every year, and this year is the first time the new Democratic Council, Congress has pushed it forward, and it's possible it'll actually pass in this current Congress. It's going to be an extremely controversial hot topic in the coming up elections. It appears that the majority of the current presidential candidates for Democrat presidential elections are in favor of some sort of reparations, and from Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker to full scale support for some form of reparations. Tulsi Gabbard is actually one of the sponsors of HR 40. Even Beto O'Rourke and various have said to some level they think it should be considered or looked into. And the assumption on the Republican side, there'll be zero support for any form of reparations. And we could try to flush out the issues behind saying should there even be a consideration for reparations, say that if damages occurred and like Deshaun was saying, the brain drain, the labor, the actual harm inflicted on people, to put a monetary amount, who would that go to? Would it go to all African Americans, all non-whites, all or just the actual descendants of slaves? So Kamala Harris, famously, she's half Indian, half Jamaican. Her descendants were not didn't suffer under American slavery. However, she's a big proponent of it. So there's a lot of different issues within the Democratic debate. So hopefully we'll do the two different aspects, maybe from a philosophical, theological, just like reparations. As a Republican, presumably, there is no argument at all for reparations. There will not be a single Republican in the House who will vote in favor of reparations. Trump will be openly against it. We got at CIMIC, we'd put the Jewish diaspora, the famous reparations that happened from Nazi Germany.
Right. Let me jump
Israel.
in for a second. See, the framing of the conversation, from the perspective of the Democratic approach, is that the Democratic Party themselves have to own up to their fault because they were the party of slavery. And to misfire in the sense of saying that you're going to offer a one-time monetary compensation to the victims of this atrocity is to do it no justice at all. That's a second wave of humiliation and injustice. So, from a Machiavellian perspective, it's best to not receive anything at all than misappropriate. And I know that sounds controversial for certain people, but when you look at the whole totality of the issue, there are a lot of groups that haven't been mentioned. And one of them is the Arab involvement in slavery. The intersectionality of the African American and Jewish diasporas, which is kind of funny if you want to take the Bible as a historical document. You look at the first expulsion of Jewish peoples from the land of modern Israel to Babylon, and then you can take it and fast forward. The second expulsion was from the same place throughout the Roman Empire. So the African American diaspora was about 1492 through the Spanish Inquisition. That was actually the third time around the block for the Jewish nation. So that's what makes it interesting, because this is the first major expulsion of African peoples from the mainland at that particular point in time. And a lot of Americans really don't understand the totality of the situation, and I'm not advocating or showing preference to any particular group, but what I'm here to do is just to give a correct assessment of what's really going on, because to misrepresent is to do it the travesty of injustice a third time. So that's basically what I want to be very clear about, because you got a lot of people that look at this from a surface level, but let's peel back the layers and really investigate.
Yes, let me put out. We discussed before in a few important points, and I saw Simon had already mentioned in the chat that the few different divisions. Okay, reparations if there was reparations, should that require the person leaving America and not coming back? In the terms like the Jewish reparations from Germany, it included the fact that we lost our property and we no longer had a claim to anything left in Germany. I mean, possibly like stolen property or whatever, but generally reparations from Germany to Israel, when the German government collectively wrote large checks over a decade. The founding of Israel, the majority of the money in the early 50s came from German reparations, and that was collectively assessed against the whole German government. And it was a check that was given straight to Israel and also to, I forget, it was the World Jewish Congress or however it was distributed. And it was also, similar to, saying the concept wasn't that we didn't remain in Europe, we left. And so the one aspect of reparations to African Americans, would reparations be for people that remained in America, or would reparations be part of leaving the country? You're saying,
right. Let me jump in. You got a comment. 447 says reparations will further demoralize blacks. And I'm in agreement with that comment, because, it's an injustice to not have a correct assessment. You have to pull out all the stops. And my opinion of how to deal with
you don't have to talk into the mic.
The truth of the situation is to do a long latitude study. You have to have, fact finding over a long period of time, at least a decade, to even begin to scratch the surface. So I'm totally in agreement with what 447 just stated, because, to do a one-time payment is to demoralize and humiliate further. Like the word reparations has been thrown around, just like David just said.
Repatriation.
We have same thing, reparations, about picking up and leaving America. And, far as true justice, that's the only thing that African Americans, in my opinion, can rightfully do to reestablish themselves in world history, is to go out and try to recreate something brand new, because the system itself in America, as great as it is, African Americans will continue to be at a handicap, because the system itself is not designed to promote Black or African American collective unity, and, integration is complicated and political, but at the same token, like, it lacks a lot of cultural fundamentals that other people identify with, like the empowerment elements. Instead of thinking about group dynamics, it becomes all inclusive, which never is accurate, because when you have a mishmash of too much, then you really never have a focus.
Yes, I mean, there's a few things we should cover, like the basic concept of punishment for a crime, payment for a crime versus collective payment. And obviously, so to say, okay, the Democrat Party was the party of slavery, the Republicans were the party of abolition, but now generally, you would look at the so to say Republicans would largely be the ones footing the bill for reparations, even though the Republicans were the party of abolition. And who's going to get paid? Would it, could you assess, like, if it was a lawsuit of people who actually descended from slaves, looking for the people who descended from slave holders and making an actual lawsuit or a claim against that money that came from the actual perpetrators of the crime, versus a collective assessment against the whole society of, regardless of whether people participated in it or not, that there's collectively going to have to be a payment. And then the practicalities of a payment where it would be, does every person with black skin get a check, or do they have to actually prove that they were a descendant of an African American? And that also ties into repatriation and the current politics with Trump and saying these people hate America. And if you look at the fundamental, so it was America a European, so to say, white man experiment, and so the African Americans were here largely by mistake and a crime, and the solution to it is either twofold: to say African Americans are here, they're going to be equal, they're just as much Americans as everybody, and they're going to have full rights, desegregation, affirmative action, reparations. Or is reparations part of repatriation, to say African Americans being here in the first place was a mistake, and the correction to that mistake is a check and them going back to Africa, which is clearly in the news today, which people are interpreting President Trump's attack on those four congresswomen,
right? Let me jump in for a second.
As like a go back to Africa. And does the go back to Africa make a difference if a check comes with it?
Well, I kind of disagree with that, because again, the direct perpetrators are no longer around. So it's not fair or just to hold anybody but those particular individuals who had a direct active hand in this horrific institution. And so that's back to my original statement of it's been too long. Everything is convoluted and mismanaged to the point where I'm pretty sure a lot of people who have any tangible evidence have reasons not to be forthcoming with it. Like, records are going to be hard to trace. And so basically you can't properly assess the situation. Like, you kind of like are blocked at step one, because just the processing, research itself can span over 100 years, and you still probably won't get close to touching the real core issue. Because we know of institutions, we know of like beneficiaries, but at what point in time? Like, are we to hold the Africans accountable who participated in slavery, who were direct agents of greater powers that benefited from it? We have to look at this from a broad perspective, because in my personal opinion, everybody is at fault. It's enough blame to go around. It is just at various points in time of certain individuals who benefited from slavery. It was the Africans themselves, and then it moved into the Arab realm, and then later on down the line, the Europeans came on board. So, you got to look at things from perspective of what is the capitalist economic system built on. It's plenty of blame to go around. Like I mentioned in our first broadcast, like transnational banking was not a Jewish invention. It was a Catholic invention. The Medicis were the first transnational family that pioneered what became known as modern banks. So a lot of people have a lot of misinformation and misnomers about this topic. It's a sad commentary in American history, but at the same token, African Americans by and large are a lot better off in America than their fellow African brothers and sisters on the mainland, because America is a first world nation. And I talk to Africans, intellectuals like myself, university students, business people, and it's no mistake that the whole world is trying to get to America. So, I have to be honest and transparent and straightforward with my statements. Like, my goal is to raise awareness. And, this is a broad self-reflection of an individual such as myself, who's just basically thinking out loud. Like, it's an insult to my intelligence to, jump on the bandwagon of blame, because it's a lot more complex than that. Like, I think economic motives and agendas are more heavily at play than any type of racial polarization.
And obviously what happened with Israel, there was huge disputes within Israel before reparations and the opponents of it. So you take reparation, that's going to be considered like an atonement for, God forbid, the Holocaust. And currently today, it has become like that because Israel is very close allies with Germany and Hungary and Poland, despite these things, and it's looked like okay, like well, they paid reparations. It's it's done. It's been settled, and so what's the purpose of reparation if it's not going to be done and settled? Let me try to be interactive with the chat. So I'm just read through some of these and let Dishan comment on it. And there's a lot of issues related to this that need to be further discussed. So Simek, appreciate you joining. He was mentioning he's not a big fan of the idea of reparations, but if there is reparation, it has to be contingent upon leaving the country, going back to Africa. Goose Bear thinks that if there's reparations, it should be the wealthy Jews who pay for it. Jewel Citizen, J.P. Knight invented the traffic light, not Garnet Morgan. He merely applied for a patent. It was not even the first 50 patents, what you mentioned last week about the traffic light. That might be a time for a different discussion, the origin of the traffic light.
Well, let me make one comment, like in regards to Jewish reparations, like the Jewish Holocaust is in distant memory. It was possible to track down individuals who were directly involved, like the Nazis, so basically the difference between Jewish reparations and African-American reparations is a case of timing, like it's too much time that has elapsed within the African-American experience.
Jewish reparations happened within 10 years of World War II. And they were paid out over a period of 10 years, but within a few years, the case was settled, reparations were handled. But to some extent, it was the whole German people, regardless of their culpability, that had to collectively pay for it, and you weren't necessarily able to, and it was a lot of the next generation because it was just a bill put on the whole German people, regardless of what they had done during the war, that had to.
Right, but it was easier to look back and start to ID the guilty. Like, for instance, had the African American political apparatus did this 100 or 200 years ago, then we would have been a lot better off and on course, because nobody thought about the ideal of reparations like shortly after slavery. Maybe they did, but they didn't press hard enough for it. And that's just the hard facts. As a political organized body, maybe our political leaders took us in the wrong direction of trying to integrate instead of establish nationhood somewhere else, and say, well, it's time to pull out. Let's get out of here. Let's go and reestablish our culture and ourselves, because it's too much that has been lost from a cultural perspective, language, time-honored customs. The majority of Americans have no recollection or memory of African culture or education. It has to be a big relearning, and I think the relearning is going to start in America, just as independent communities that stick together. That's more feasible and doable than like saying that the government owe me something, because a one-time monetary payment is not going to suffice as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so let me try to keep active with the chat. So just try to keep a concise statement so I could catch up with the chat. So Spacetime DCR, what your guests think of the idea of Zionism as becoming a movement of the self-determination of all diaspora peoples who want to go and build up their homeland like the Jews?
Well, Zionism itself was a utopian doctrine and always has been from the earliest inception. That's not a new ideal, because it's been widely debated about like the intersectionality of African American as well as Jewish diasporas. Like the intersectionality, it's a lot of commonalities, it's a lot of cultural traits, and I'm saying far as subcultural traits, and so yeah, that's a very plausible ideal, but it has to definitely be investigated and clarified more.
So Goose Bear, I don't even think it is an issue of race. The masses of any group should have money thrown at them. Family wealth only lasts 3 generations on average, regardless of who the family is. Yeah, all that's very important. And said, like, from the Republican side, there might not even be any venue for the concept of reparations, in terms of that it's not the government's venue to handle. So even so it's an interesting outlook on it. Saying as a Republican, reparations is probably just a non-starter. Okay, a lot of people in the comment want to talk about the Jewish role in slavery. Simek, 40% of Jews own slaves, a couple percent of whites own slaves. Yeah, and so statistically,
well, that's not necessarily true because
of the Jews in America. So there,
no, like the 1% was really.
I'm saying the number of Jews in America at the time was extremely small, but of the Jews in America at the time, I don't know if the statistic is high, but say as high as 40% of the Jews of the original Portuguese and Sephardic Jews in America, 40% of those were slaveholders.
That's not true.
As opposed to the whites in America, only 2% of the whites in America.
That is absolutely not true. Like I've looked in this throughout my political discourse, and it was no more than 5% of massive plantation owners. Like you might have had a lot of independent parties who were able to acquire slaves.
How many Jews
on a small scale?
In 1800, how many Jews were in America?
I couldn't tell you exactly the numbers, but
less than 10,000.
Okay, let's say that's true.
And what percent of those less than 10,000 Jews in America 1800 were slave owners?
About 5%. Like I sincerely.
So it's a matter for research. It's a matter for debate. But certainly, God forbid, it could be likely that the Jews were more likely, per capita to be slaveholders than your average European.
Well, you know what? Like massive plantation and land interests was not something that the average citizen could be a participant in. Like those massive plantations, money was coming from Europe and other places to finance and self-start. So yeah, you might have had people that came into this country, but they definitely had backing from somewhere else. That's why I say I can't agree with the numbers that you said. 40% of Jews at that particular time owned slaves, because slavery was not a poor person's endeavor. That's just like saying 40% of any group are major holders in the Wall Street system, which is totally absurd. So, I'm just saying, staying on course with, accuracy is part of what I'm trying to be about, because I've seen with my own eyes and talked with people that were the direct beneficiaries on all sides of the spectrum, from Africans. I got a friend of mine whose family is still directly benefiting from the IMF. They get issued checks, and they were definitely large mineral resource entrepreneurs, for better words. So you can't just put the finger on one particular person. This is a collective political operation.
Yeah, so people who watch me regularly, I guess I'm most popular on YouTube, arguing largely in favor of immigration and multiculturalism. And my view in America is that not necessarily Europe. Europe might be a different case, but America should embrace multiculturalism, and might have an intelligent immigration.
Let me make a comment about some. Gooseberry said this dude is defending Jewish crimes. Well, Gooseberry, let me make you aware of this. When the institution of slavery was introduced in Africa for the first time, there was no concept of a Jewish nation. So basically, I would have to enlighten you in that aspect to further do your research, because definitely, you're looking at it from a very recent contemporary perspective. So I just had to put that out there.
Yeah, historical revisionism is difficult to know what happened in the past and to assess this. And to some extent, it doesn't matter who is responsible for it. If reparations happens, it'll be collectively assessed against every American, and there won't be a way to assign who was more or less responsible for historical or intellectual accuracy. The involvement of Jews in slavery is an interesting topic that requires more research. Like I've read the Nation of Islam's literature. I've read, Professor Sarnow, and there's a whole bunch of research. But for the nature of the question of reparations, it's largely irrelevant of who was responsible for the crime. It's just going to be Americans collectively are going to have to pay for it, regardless of who was responsible.
I agree. Like a beautiful lie is just what it is, a beautiful lie. but people tend to steer away from the ugly truth. And the ugly truth of the matter is that collectively, we all are responsible because we benefit from the cultural advantages that we have, like through technology, through information. Like, every last American living right now in this contemporary society is a direct beneficiary from all of those atrocities and behavior. And that generation paid on both sides. So, I must put this in the right context because, it's real easy to point the other finger, but when you point the finger at one person, you have three pointing back at you. So, make sure that you know what you're talking about, because if you don't, then it could come back to haunt you.
Yeah, that's heavily disputed, obviously. Like, I've been in these circles for a while, and I'm familiar with these debates on the level of to put a benefit, how much did America benefit from slavery? How much, to put an economic value, and that'll be a matter if they do pass HR 40. There'll be different people that will assess that at different levels, and certainly here in the North where there wasn't slavery, or the actual what beside there's the actual crime of the dehumanization and the harm that was caused to people in slavery versus the unpaid labor, and all of these things will be heavily disputed and are would require countless institutes to research and try to assess. But I mean, certainly people in these circles are well familiar with literature on all sides that to say what was actually the benefit to America that the slaves brought, and whether it's overestimated or underestimated.
Well, I will say from my firsthand knowledge, like, I went to the Charles Wright African American Museum in Detroit, Michigan, which is the biggest African American museum in the world, and they have a direct illustration about what happened on a. They make a very simple synopsis, but you can come in and become a part of the museum and get a more in-depth knowledge of what happened during the slave 400 years of transatlantic slavery. So I will say that the whole concept of racial identity was way later. Like, it was a alien ideal as far as Africans were concerned. Like, the majority of Africans were mercantile based. They wanted to do business. They were always expanding empire. People were selling all over the place. And so that's how a lot of this stuff came into play, because obviously, there was abuse within the system, but the whole initial intention myself was based on so-called high ideals, just like with the early Europeans. People sold like a dream to people that they can do better, that, this wilderness and frontier called America was all good until they got here and had to cultivate the land. So, with that being said, reality comes in. There's fantasy and then you have reality. And, this political season with the HR 40, like, personally, I don't even think the people that's trying to introduce the bill is qualified enough, because they don't have a working knowledge of African world civilization. It takes a very astute, well-researched person to even encounter this possibility.
Yeah, I mean, if the Democrats had a landslide victory and they got the presidency, the House, and the Senate, like, certainly it's very likely that you would have reparations. That's, the elections have consequences, and most of the Democrats now, reparations has, there's been a push to the left. The presidential candidates we'll see on the the local elections and House and Senate debates. But yeah, I mean, if the Democrats have a landslide victory, presumably you'll have some sort of reparations, and then the Republicans would be cornered into trying to limit the amount of reparations or argue about the assessment. But I mean, if there's a Republican victory, certainly this will. That's why I was mentioning earlier that I debate multiculturalism, immigration often, and reparations is part of that larger issue of the future of America. Do you picture make America great again? People, does that mean a European-based Western value system, or is America moving forward to a multicultural empire of some sort, or all different visions, and reparations will just be a tiny piece of that puzzle related to bigger consequences, and it's probably going to.
Well, my opinion about that is America is always going to be a country of cultural comfort zones. So, while there's multiculturalism in the public square at large, you're still going to have groups that are going to feel most comfortable within their own selves. So,
well, I mean, just as the people, from a lot of the shows they're tuning in might refer to, so to say, the browning of America, the demographic change, and
it doesn't matter, because you know what?
It doesn't matter to you.
Well, to me, correct, but also, it's not just the browning of America.
You're say that you don't,
because
you
it's
don't
like
care,
no.
You don't mind if America becomes brown.
No, it's not just about that. I don't mind.
Minority.
Listen to this. I don't mind any person having a cultural preference. If you are a Caucasian and prefer Caucasian people, then so be it. If you are African American and prefer African American people, then so be it. Those that choose to integrate it because of their own personal choices, then so be it. But I don't think it's any dogma and extremes that to say that American is going to be brown is a misnomer. I think America is going to continue to be what it is, which is a cultural melting pot, in a sense that you're going to have different dynamics and different groups coming from all over the place. And some of those groups are going to choose to remain within their own working communities. That's what I think is going to happen and continues to happen.
Yeah, I was saying the direction of policies. I was, we were talking before the show, and where, so to say, blue state Republicans, because almost all the whole Jewish community, majority of the African American community, especially with gerrymandering, are blue state Republicans. So even if we're Republicans, we're in a blue state, in a blue area that is basically completely controlled by Democrats, and it's a different nature for people who might be watching from the red state areas. And Republican in that area means something completely different than although in terms of larger coalition forming. So things like demographic change, immigration for Republicans in urban areas, in blue areas, are not as big of an issue as where the changes happening to society, demographic change, so-called browning of America is really a non-issue in to blue state Republicans, but from a larger red state Republicans, it might be a key issue.
Well, I heard this one guy make a comment, like in the past, a Klan member said that, he was in the construction trades, and he said that even if he builds a house for a non-white person, he wouldn't ask him for a drink of water, which is true. Like within the course of a day, we interact with all types, but people are going to choose to be who they want to be at home. And I think the economics of life will bring everybody together, just like during the time of segregation in the South. Certain African Americans, like you mentioned, the Nation of Islam, are pro-segregation. That doesn't stop them from coming in the public square, interacting with whites on an economic level or educational level. But this is just what society is. You're going to have those that choose to mix and those who don't mix, and that's just a fact of life. It's always been like that.
Let's try to catch up with the chat. And so you try to keep your responses to just
Okay.
a few sentences, so I'll be able to read as many of these as possible. Jewel Citizen's wondering whether Deshaun Marquel regards Jews as white. You just want to give a quick response.
It's a difference between ethnic white and WASP. I basically consider Jews, even the white Jews, to be Middle Eastern in origin, but a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant is someone from the British Isles or Welsh in origin. So that's a quick synopsis on it. It could be more like faceted, like far as what are the white phenotypes, like Finnish, and you can get into a lot of it. But I'm just saying, just real quick, that's what I choose and perceive to be the white archetype.
Okay, so I'm going to try to keep the questions just to the topic. People have other questions directly from me. Put it in the comments to the video. or maybe a separate stream. And got Brundle in the chat. Me and Brundlefly will be talking tomorrow with sorry, scroll, make sure I get the name right. Ebert, the author, John Ebert, and his other author, who have a different historical takes and commentary on pop culture and society going back from different cultures. So look forward to that stream tomorrow. Check Brundlefly's Twitter. People asking, you want to chime in quickly on Epstein?
Well, he's just one of many, like that stuff is across the board. It isn't exclusive to any person or individual. He just happens to be who he is. It's no different than his other archetype across the board. You got your Frank Lucases, you have your, Timothy McVeighs and all the rest of them. So I don't see any like grouping in any type of criminality. I just think it's just criminal individuals who happen to flock together. So like if you getting back to the Jewish question, yeah, he just happens to be a Jewish man who got caught up out in criminal activity, but I don't think it's exclusive or indicative of any collective type of situation at all.
Okay, yeah, John David Ebert is the name of the author that will be on Brundlefly's show tomorrow, so chime in for that. You have anything you want to talk about Trump's tweets about the 4 congresswomen, including Rashida Tlaib, who took over John Conyers' seat right here?
Well,
we're actually hoping we might be able to have a discussion. We think that it's possible Rashida Tlaib, like now obviously she's in news and very busy, but she might actually talk with us, and we hope to speak with her.
Well, to share with the audience, like, unfortunately, I am in Rashida Tlaib's district, which is the 13th district in Detroit. And I totally believe that the president's remarks were taken out of context, because personally, I feel she has did nothing for the 13th district. And me as a registered voter, haven't received any type of benefits, is baiting across the board. Like, she has antagonized and said things about the president. So basically it's just a reciprocal thing, and people is trying to show biasness within that whole conversation.
Yeah, but she has somewhat became the loudest voice. So even in terms of the the coalition of minorities, the Jewish community, the African American community, it could be that she'll be raised up as she's just willing to say the things that other people wouldn't. So even John Conyers was a more reserved person. So if it came to a loud voice for reparations, it could be Tlaib will be. I predict she's going to be in the national media.
But she's an opportunist because she's willing to use anything to promote her personal agenda. And that's what I find to be problematic. I don't think she cares about anybody but herself. And, it doesn't make it right on any end of the conversation. Like, why should she be considered a hero and President Trump vilified for making similar comments and certain behavior prototypes? So like, I just can't buy it, like, let fair be fair. Like, it's both inappropriate in a certain aspect, but at the same token, both individuals do have freedom of speech.
Yeah, Brundlesman, Duvid is based, acknowledges how we feel, probably referring to red state right-leaning whites. And I was watching Ed Dutton's talk today about how conservatives generally can emphasize with liberals, but liberals can't emphasize with conservatives. And I could see that, like, I could understand how other people feel, even though that's not how I feel. And then unfortunately, the divide from the liberals, there is a tendency that they can't understand how conservatives feel, hence why President Trump right now, all the major news stations, basically concluded, he's a racist and the people who support him are racist, as opposed to looking at a natural, so as Deshaun is right-leaning, so to say, Republicans, we could emphasize with group selection and that whites, Caucasians, Europeans might have, and even we might not agree with it, or say that those interests are opposite our interest. We could at least acknowledge that I could understand that if I were, so to say, a blue-eyed man, I might have a tendency to think like that also.
Well, yeah, of course, because everybody has a will to survive, And if I was a white male in this country, I would definitely be pro NRA, because there are forces out to kill and annihilate the white race. That's just a fact of reality. And as a black man, it doesn't stop me from being proactive with my self-defense, like intellectually. I do believe in the Second Amendment. I will stand my ground. But what I will do is respect all, even if I disagree with that opinion. Like, I'm not beyond giving people space. And that's important. You got to know who to give space to. If a person requests that personal space, then please allow them to have it.
I'm going to have to agree with Simek here, and he's pushing back here. Epstein, what a poor take on Epstein. Epstein worked for Mossad. Politicians came to Epstein, do it willing. And I would agree that Epstein crimes are only possible within the structure of the Jewish community. Certainly Barry Kirshner, who was the DA, who wanted to completely let him off. Probably related. You noted that Epstein's a donor to Jewish charities, and certainly his relationship with the British royal family and Wexner and all these different people that he's only able to do it as someone who's largely affiliated with the Jewish community, and the Jewish community should look at it. What is it about the structure of our institutes or culture that would allow someone like Epstein to function within our society? The Upper East Side, the heartland of Jewish power, that Epstein's a respectable, certain part, but I would acknowledge more the Jewishness of Epstein and say he's not just a criminal who happens to be a Jew, that like his Judaism, his connection to Israel, and these different things are directly connected to his crimes. And, the Jewish community should probably, do more to see to it that, we don't allow our brethren to do it, or certainly bribe us into it, so that, God forbid, people like him that may, through donating money or benefiting our community, be allowed to get away with doing certain things like that. And so I think we're caught up. Was there anything else you wanted to add? I caught up on most of the
Well,
chat.
you know what? I only can speak upon the things that I have a firsthand account of. I'm totally am of the mindset that if I'm not an insider, then I'm not going to make comments about any community. But I'm just saying, case in point, like, I only know my firsthand accounts of what I've focused on, my specialties, my academic training, my life experiences. So, I give everybody pretty much the benefit of the doubt, but I don't like to label people. I don't like, those stereotypes. I don't agree with any collective labeling. I look at everybody as individuals. They make the particular choices they make because they want to. So that's just my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, God forbid, someone saying I could sing the praises of the Jewish people all day, and but I just would acknowledge that there is a role that Epstein, being Jewish, plays in his crimes and being able to get away with it. Certainly, he lives in Jewish communities and Manhattan, Upper East Side, the Virgin Islands, and Palm Beach, Florida. His, Alan Dershowitz being his attorney, his network of friends, and we should look inward and see, how is it possible that someone like Epstein rises through our ranks and is able to do something like this, and then comes out afterwards, and then can we push aside and just say, oh, he happens to have been a horrible person who was a Jew, without looking collectively to say, what was it? God forbid, a collective crime. And even we're looking at reparations, if it's a similar issue, like you're looking at reparations as a collective punishment upon all of society. So is something like Epstein a collective crime of the Jewish people just because Epstein happened to be a Jew or took advantage of Jewish institutes? Is that a similar issue of why can't the collective blame be put upon the Jewish people for Epstein then?
Because they ain't responsible for his actions. They wasn't there when he committed these crimes. I'm assuming, that, like, even if a person suggests things to an individual, they still have to make up their mind about doing it. So yeah, I'm not willing.
Well, what's the difference with reparations?
Well, it's no difference. It's the same ideal. Everything is based on firsthand accounts. It's no, like, collective bargaining in the sense that I can't be responsible for things that I don't have knowledge of or things I didn't do. Just like even the descendants of slave owners, or you look at the like African American males, like you got some pretty bad people out there, and it doesn't reflect the total ideal of the community. So I can't hold a whole group accountable for a few bad individuals within every group. That's not intelligent. That's just my opinion.
Do you have any predictions how this is going to play out in the Democratic elections and your primaries coming up, and specifically in the Detroit community, the African American community in Detroit, and where does that leave the divide for Black conservatives in as these issues come up? Because presumably, a Black conservative has to be unequivocally opposed to reparations.
Well, I would say in this upcoming
I just add
election,
to that was Brundlefly, who became racially aware, was his so to say Black conservative friends, and he's like, well, you're a Black conservative, how you can't support reparations?
Well, no, I'm not totally conservative. I'm a moderate. It's a difference. Like, I view all issues through a filter, but in this upcoming election in Detroit, it's going to be no shortage of mudslinging. So I think each side is going to use everything they can to their advantage to promote their cause and agenda. And I don't think it's so much about my personal choice, more so than my collective presence. Like, I'm out here with everybody else, and my ideal is to exist in a peaceful way. Like, I don't have or desire conflict with anybody out here, regardless of what their particular view is. Like, going back to my constitutional roots, like, I am a constitutionalist. I don't care what people say, that the Constitution didn't represent me at a particular point in time, but I still ascribe to the idealism of the Constitution because it works. So neither more or less, like, it doesn't matter. Like, as an individual, I have to be accountable for what I do. And I'm very much about the individual free thinking aspect of life.
Yeah, a citizens reporter, I mentioned Erica, has been on my channel. She's asking about your YouTube channel, or like, I guess, debate challenges, because presume a lot of these people would challenge you to a debate and press you heavily on these issues.
Well, yeah, I'm well researched in these topics, but at this particular point in time, is it's not doable. Like, I come in as a guest on your show. I appreciate you inviting me. I appreciate the audience. But personally, like, right now, I'm not in a position to concentrate a lot of my time on, like, public debates. Amongst friends, I will participate, but at the same token, I'm totally obligated in a lot of other areas, and I just don't have the time. But I appreciate all of that.
So you think within the Metro Detroit community, reparations will basically just be a given? Everyone supports it, maybe even vocally supports it, and there won't even be internal debates among the African American community or Jewish community. Just like,
well, I'm sure it will.
We're for it. That's what we're pushing. Or will there be some sort of pushback from the huge Democratic base here against reparations?
Well, the conversation, the public discourse is going to continue to exist. How it's going to be represented and what the outcome is going to be, I can't say. But at the same token, I don't think the conversation is going anywhere, because certain people will press the issue. But
just everyone here is for it, and everyone in the red areas is against it. And there's no real dialogue. So a YouTube show like ours is as close to dialogue as you're going to get.
I agree with that. Yeah, it's an oversimplification.
In our area, there's not going to be any debate. Everyone's for it. And, from the people tuning in from the red state, there's not really any debate. Everyone's against it.
Well, I don't believe in oversimplifications. I think that the majority is going to rule. Whatever that majority is, then so be it. Like, we all have to live with it. And that's just the outcome. It's just, I don't think it's a good choice as far as strategy or statistical data to just say that it's going to be this way, it's going to be that way. Certain people could press the issue, and even if the legislature is passed, it could not have the end results that a person is expecting. It could be totally the worst thing that ever happened, because once you get what you're going to get, then you can't raise the issue again. That definitely could work against you from a political aspect. So I can honestly say I really just don't know, but I think it's good to raise the awareness. Like you said, a show like this is about the closest that you're going to get to intelligent conversation outside of a think tank, you know.
Yeah, the think tank is more going to be research than conversation or debate. Just in like the statistics and numbers, and maybe Deshaun Marquell will chime in. Certainly for my debates over the last year, a lot of people who've thought about these issues favor balkanization, just saying like we're not going to come to an agreement. The American experiment is too fractured, and so you have your elements that think they could turn back the demographic tide and make America largely 80-90% European again through austerities and anti-immigration measures, or you have your people that just figure we're going to keep on increasing immigration and multiculturalism until America is minority, non-white, and then we'll have a different issue. And looking at the battles is just this collision that can't be prevented because the two different schools are against each other. There's no real discourse. We're just both fighting for the future of America, and whoever wins. So people say, what about balkanization? Does it make sense that America should just split up?
No, I think a lot of people was fighting to live in the past. The present and the future is still being defined. And, I think people are only scared because they don't know what to expect. So it's going to be interesting to see what really happens. Just like,
you're referring to integration. So you're saying people are just scared of integration.
Well, I can't just put one label on it. I can say just
change.
People are just scared of the most contemporary issues that's facing our civilization. I don't think that domestic issues is going to dominate the international landscape. I think the whole concept of Americanization around the globe is a more timely issue because Western culture versus the other cultures out there and a particular spins on it. And
I think someone asked earlier about, is Islam compatible with the West? And you've mentioned, I know I'm much more Islamic, Muslim friendly or Arab immigration than you are. But if you look at immigration in terms of Islam being compatible, and we're here in Detroit, you're in Rashida Tlaib's district.
Well, you know what? Islam itself is a particular philosophy for those adherents, but how people interact with any particular culture, like this happens to be America and the Western culture. Like I go to a school that's heavily Muslim in the student body, and like for better terms, people are supposed to be getting educated and acclimated to society at large, like through our educational system. But what people choose to practice at home is something that is still yet to be seen. Like only the higher power knows what people's real agendas are. And I think everything is merit-based and through behavior. So if a person chooses to be a player and come on board and work with the society at large, obey our laws, understand our institutions that are American, then I don't see anybody not being able to participate. That's my response to that.
Yeah, I'm seeing people are showing in the chat. I guess Richard Spencer was given airtime on CNN on Jake Tapper today. And if people like Richard Spencer have more of a foothold in the Republican Party, like the Pew survey shows that over 50% of so to say white Americans think that it would be a bad thing if America becomes less white or legitimately worried about demographic change. And we know that President Trump, despite possible misogyny and different things, won the white woman vote. That there is a substantial racial divide facing America here.
Well, you know what? Race is overplayed. I think the real issue at hand is self-determination, and it's a resource race. And anytime power and resources are being distributed, that people tend to bring out their real self. like whether it's through individual efforts or group dynamics, everybody is striving for pretty much the same thing, great housing, fresh water, good food. These are human issues. These are not just race issues. Race is just a smokescreen to the greater issues, in my opinion.
Yeah, but do you acknowledge that the polling data about the 50, 100 million Americans that don't see it the way you do?
Well, so be it. Like you always gonna have an enlightened class, and then you're gonna have a lot of the masses. Like for better words, somebody told me the masses are asses. So of course, the majority of people who don't take the time to invest themselves in learning won't understand, they won't know, they won't do, and they will not be prepared.
Okay, so Jules Citizen here, who I saw your chat. You complimented Deshaun Marquel very much last week. I showed that to him after. Thank you. So he's asking if you seem to be in favor of merit-based. What about diversity mandates like affirmative action? Are you for or against affirmative action?
At this particular point in time, I think the whole concept of affirmative action got convoluted. Like originally, affirmative action didn't mean unqualified. But in today's world, a lot of people who are unqualified have risen up through the American, like the affirmative action system. Like so many things in the extreme Democratic left have become abused and convoluted. So, yeah, I'm not a full proponent of it. Like my only request is to stay out the way. If you're not going to help, I'm willing to do it myself. And that's my take on that.
Okay, yeah, we've been at it about an hour. I've tried to be interactive. We got JM Richatelli, who's our local conspiracy theorist, and he's got these theories about the Rothschilds and banking. I'm not sure if you want to comment on his, what in my opinion, overestimation of the power of the Rothschild family.
Yeah, that's to me, I think that's water under the bridge. If you really wanted to trace things back into the origin of financial institutions, you would look more towards the black nobility in Italy, because banking itself was not a Jewish construct. And you could do your research on that one. The Trans-Western Union was a Catholic invention. The Eastern merchants had their way of doing things, but like international banking as we know it today is an Italian invention.
Oh, anything else you want to discuss?
No, I'm pretty good. And I appreciate the audience for tuning in.
Yeah, I guess Brundlefly retweeted it last week, or I'd had that spat with no apologies that might have given a bigger audience, and hopefully we're going to be able to continue next week. We might go more into a preview of the Democratic primaries. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get up to 1,000 subscribers to actually be able to live stream tomorrow. I'm going to be on Brundlefly, I think at noon or 1, might be Central Time. I'm not sure exactly if it's going to be 1 or noon. So hopefully he'll tweet that out pretty soon. Interviewing author John David Ebert. I'll put his Twitter in the chat. He's got a YouTube page, actually 10,000 viewers. He's going to be on JF Public Space, John Forsace Garepi, next Monday night. We're going to continue the conversation. Right there's possibly different things we're going to move into. So right now we're just talking larger, bigger issues. I'm introducing Deshaun to my audience. It's possible if there's show requests. He doesn't have a studio set up right now, or he doesn't have a setup right now to stream on his own. He has a YouTube channel that's not too active. It's possible if someone wanted to have him on a show, I would be able to have him stream from my house. So if anyone watching and you want to have book Deshaun on your show, you could reach out to me, and I might be able to organize that. But he'd come over to my house and do that from my studio, and hopefully in the next few weeks or few months he'll be able to set up his own studio. He's on local Detroit radio, but as I said, doesn't have a studio set up to do his own YouTube streaming right now. any thoughts for what you want to talk about next week?
We'll leave it up in the air. You know, like, this is your format. This is your show. I support you wholeheartedly. I appreciate your efforts and your vision. So I'm going to let you just drive. You know, I'm not trying to take anything over, but I'm just trying to support.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And we've thought about doing a whole bunch of different things, and even more like Torah talks or possibly local Jewish politics or different things. But, considering my audience, and largely a lot of my audience is based off of my appearances on alt-right, right-wing things. So, I mean, Richard Spencer being on CNN, that's a big deal. He's one of the bigger names. I've had a slight level of debate. So a lot of people watching are fans of these famous alt-right figures. And Brundlefly obviously is more in the Richard Spencer camp, and we compare ourselves to like Hannity and Combs, where I'm the Combs, but it's housed on Fox News. So I'm voicing a more multicultural, pro-diversity, immigration outlook, although the majority of the people that watch these shows are in disagreement with me on these issues. And I think Dijon's also used to that type thing where he'd be comfortable to appear on a, so to say, a hostile audience where almost everyone watching is in disagreement with his opinions. But
that's a healthy discourse.
Yeah, I mean, a well thought out person, someone enjoys reading and researching, and a healthy debate where it's saying we're willing to come on to, so to say, the opposing territory and express our ideas that we think are well thought out, and we're going to keep on doing it. So I'll leave a minute for any closing comments to the chat, or let Dishan give final words, anything you want to express to the audience. And we appreciate people tuning in. Like, I'm trying to get my 1,000 subscribers. I don't usually shill for subscribers, but if you like my content, please subscribe, or encourage other people to subscribe, so that I'll be able to live stream at the Democratic debates. I'll have my cell phone. I'll do interviews outside. Hopefully Jake Turks, the Hasidic, famous Hasidic broadcast from Ami Magazine, he might be coming to cover the Democratic debates. If he does, hopefully I'll get him on my show.
Well, I want to say something to your fans. Like, every last one of you guys, regardless of who you are and what you represent, be proud of who you are. That's my final words.
Yeah, and I even say my frenemies, because unfortunately, I'm looking at here. We got 10 likes and 13 dislikes. So I'll call my fans my frenemies, who God forbid, I don't even want to say I'm the one they love to hate, but I'm a voice of who's willing to discuss these difficult topics with the people who disagree with me. So okay, you gave down votes to my video. If you're watching, you gave a down vote, that's fine. That's your right. But I enjoy this. I enjoy giving voice to the opposing side. People know I'm a chess player. I stream chess, and it sharpens our mind to not just be in the echo chamber and to discuss these important topics with the most opposing views on it. So we're going to continue to do that. That's what we're here for.
Have a good night.
Okay. Yeah, have a great night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and check out the Brundlecast tomorrow for John David Ebert for an interesting discussion.